All right. It's just gonna.
Just take a second.
Yep. Well, and Ricky, I will make you a co-host.
And do you have roll call?
I do.
Okay. Do we have any committee members that are online today? I'm expecting at least one.
I'm promoting Allison and I'm promoting Tony to panelist right now.
Excellent.
And me too. I'm gonna promote Amy and I'm gonna promote Melissa as well.
All right, great. Waiting for Tony to show up. He should be promoted, right?
He is, he's already in.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
There he is.
All right.
See again.
Is there another view?
Oh, there it is.
Okay, perfect. Right. Welcome, everybody, to the July 2024 meeting of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Appreciate everyone that braved the weather in the summer way that we have to brave the weather, not the winter way. That made it out today. Thank you for everyone online. Thanks for tuning in. And we have our agenda on the AHAC website from City of Bend. So if anyone needs an agenda and doesn't have it, you can get it there. Let's start with public comment. Do we have anyone that would like to present public comment? Come on up. And we've got a fairly open agenda, so I'd say let's take 4 minutes.
I won't bore you that long.
Okay, feel free to do that.
Does this microphone, does it need to be angled a certain way or is this?
No, you should be good like it is.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Chair Schmidt, committee members. My name is Morgan Greenwood. I do government affairs for Central Oregon Builders Association. And I'm just here before you all today because I'm sure that you are aware that the second reading of the Tree Preservation Code is coming up before council in exactly a week. And so I just wanted to make this body aware of a couple points that will definitely impact housing availability and affordability, both from a purchasing standpoint and for long term. As it currently stands, the tree preservation code as proposed would apply to master plans that have already received approval. The tree preservation code is not intended to take effect until a land use application has come forward. So until a subdivision or any type of land division application is submitted. It is only at that point that tree preservation code would apply. So because a master plan is largely conceptual, they wouldn't be beholden to a tree preservation code at that point in the development process. However, as I'm sure this body has talked about to great length, financing happens much further upstream than these land use actions. So for a master plan that has already received financing to then be beholden to a tree preservation code this far into the process will have significant impact on both the cost to develop and the quantity of units that would be able to be developed. So my request to council is that they essentially allow currently approved master plans to be exempt from the tree preservation code at this point. Secondly, and this is a much smaller issue that is actually part of a standard and specs updates that is being approved in concert with the tree preservation code. Utilities department is looking through various ways to increase the city's water conservation efforts. And to that extent, they are proposing to ban sod in landscaping strips in residential areas. They have created beautiful landscaping templates for developers to utilize that include both street trees and native landscaping and water-wise plantings in the landscape strips. The challenge there, however, is that it is both very significantly more costly to plant individual components of landscaping than it is to either do decorative rock as is currently proposed, as is currently approved, or to do sod. And we recognize, of course, that we are not in an environment or a period in geological and meteorological history that makes sod a viable option anymore. So because we have successfully, there are many successful developments that have allowed for street trees and decorative rock, we are requesting that that also be an approved option for landscape strips in residential zones. I will add that because in the winter, most subdivisions plow their snow to these landscaping strips, most of these plantings are likely to die anyway. And so for the homeowner, via HOA fees, the cost to maintain and then continually replant these landscaping plants will be an added and increased cost over the length of the home. So pardon me, it's both an increased cost at time of development and a continually increasing cost for the homeowner over the lifetime of the residency. So those are just wanted to make this body aware that those are true requests that the development community is making of council as they contemplate this code ahead of their second reading. And just want to thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Oh,
Morgan, can I clarify? COPE is requesting what kind of planting options?
In addition to the templates that utility department has created, that they also approve street trees as required and decorative rock. So
Okay.
street trees, irrigation, and decorative rock, yeah, as an option.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your coming to chat with us.
We have 2 other people for public comment.
Oh, are they online?
Yes,
Okay, great. Let's
I'm gonna allow Diane in right now. She should be moving over right now.
thank you. Let me know what she's doing.
There she is.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment. I'm Diane Hodiak, and I am the Executive Director of 350 Deschutes, and we are a nonprofit organization. We work in the space of clean energy efficiency and deployment of electric vehicles in our region. And we have, as part of the education component, because we are encouraging the deployment of these things, we have a conference every year to encourage the community to uptake on energy, clean energy. And we are certainly aware, and I guess this may not be a back and forth discussion, but we are certainly aware through our work that we know that clean energy reduces costs, particularly in affordable housing, because we are an equity organization. And of course, we are concerned about the cost that underserved communities and minority populations pay for their energy. We know that the energy burden in Central Oregon is significant for many people. And so we have in our conference, which is October 2, we are inviting everyone. We just wanted to make you aware of it. I do have a flyer, and I'm trying to figure out how best to disseminate that. But we do have options for developers. We will have other builder developers there talking about how they are building to deploy clean energy, how they're bringing down the cost of housing for energy to $30, $20 or $30 a month. That's incredible considering that many individuals pay, 10 times that, or households pay 10 times that. So we're just trying to learn the best way to get this word out. And if any of the developers or builders, as I say, we will have some presenters from those communities at the conference sharing their experiences and how to build high performance homes affordably. But we welcome you to attend as well. And, the cost of attendance is $25, which is basically covers your lunch. But it would be October 2, which is a Wednesday. It's an all-day event. from 8:30 to 4:30 at Central Oregon Community College.
Dan, thank you very much. We appreciate that. If you could send that flyer to the affordable housing staff, you can get their email addresses off the affordable housing housing department website for the city. If you send that over, I know that we would love to take a look at that, and the city staff will send that to everyone on the committee individually. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for your comment. All right, who do we have next?
We have Scott Norquist. I'm going to move him over now.
Great, thank you.
All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Scott Nordquist, Bend Redmond, Habitat for Humanity. And I am here with public comment ahead of the grants versus loans discussion. So if it were as simple as grants versus loans, Habitat and any other developer would definitely choose grants. But we've seen that it is not that simple, as we've heard from Rachel and Kirsten. Habitat has been partnering with the city of Bend since 2004, when they started administering CDBG funds. We have seen the benefits of loan repayments over time. We have used CDBG and affordable housing fee funds for multiple purposes over the years. In the last 5 years or so, primarily as down payment assistance. And we found that to be a really valuable and easy use of those funds, I think, on our end and on the city's end. And ultimately, where we see this issue is that more funding via loan repayments is more important than the argument of grants versus loan. So we would prefer the structure as is, because we've seen it generate additional opportunities for funding. With that, I'd also like to note, we've seen the housing department increase its staffing and capacity over the last few years. I saw some of you at the Pro Housing Award event last week. Things like that, the middle income pilot, those are a result of that increased staffing. And I know that those loan repayments are a tool that the city can use to have an admin fee to support their staffing. So those, we see benefits to Habitat, we see benefits to the community as a whole. So at this point, unless things change, Habitat would recommend continuing with the status quo in the loans.
All right, thank you, Scott. Appreciate that.
Yep, thanks.
All right, do we have anyone else online? Last chance for folks in the audience. All right, well, then let's move on to our next agenda item. Somewhere. And that is approval or non-approval of the June minutes. Do we have a motion?
I motion
to
approve
Okay,
June's minutes.
great, thank you.
We haven't sent out Jim's minutes.
You guys haven't seen them yet,
Okay,
but I appreciate your faith in the note taker.
it is on the agenda, so all
The
right.
plan was to send them out when we created the agenda, but
Yes.
we'll probably review them next.
Yeah, we'll review them at the August meeting, and we will hold your motion till then.
Not sure I will motion.
All right, shelter report at the beginning instead of at the end.
Love it.
It's nice to turn
Mix it
things
in.
around.
We are excited today that we're joined by Elizabeth.
Hello.
And good afternoon. I'm Amy Fraley, Senior Program Manager, but is my title in the Housing Department, and I work with Houselessness Solutions. I'm joined by Brooke O'Keefe, our Shelter Coordinator, and like I said, Elizabeth Oshel from our Legal Department. And we'll be providing a shelter update today.
Throughout the year, we've been collecting monthly data reports from our shelter providers. And before the annual recap, we just wanted to bring some preliminary data. This covers July of 2023 through May of 2024 for everyone except Central Oregon Villages and Safe Parking, who are working on some updates to their data. So in the 2024 fiscal year, shelters provided just under 70,000 nights of shelter combined. Their utilization rates were really high, with the Lighthouse being at 95% throughout the year and Central Oregon Villages being at 75%. And we know that Lighthouse and Franklin have had multiple months where they've been over 100% capacity. During the shift to the Blue Dog and the Franklin shelter for the Lighthouse, their capacity dropped a little bit. They had the same number of beds, but just the way that those beds were recorded resulted in a lower utilization, which brought their annual rate down. And then Franklin opened in May, and the first few months of this fiscal year, they were ramping up their capacity. So they have a lower utilization rate for those months as well.
So once they got up and running, you guys consistently saw them at 61 clients being served each month with 60 beds being offered. So once they got up and running, those family rooms were quickly overfilled, as were those respite set aside for medically vulnerable households.
And that's the average. So if I recall, we had some discussion like over the winter months where it was like
Yes.
over 100% filled in some places. So.
And part of when the Lighthouse Navigation Center began the renovation and they split into the different locations, they tried to reduce their beds to 90. We were still counting 100. And then they quickly bounced back up to 100 because the need continued to be so high. So there was that month where they're like, maybe we could have a couple less, but they were also the only cooling shelter that was open overnight and during the day for the last couple of days. So I anticipate that we'll see those numbers back up.
Yeah.
All right.
And in this fiscal year, the Lighthouse served over 530 unique individuals for overnight shelter, and 327, an average of 327 unique individuals each month for daytime services. And that overnight number for them is based on their September 2023 data. So we didn't have a full picture of the year, but that was their highest month. So that figure is likely low. And then Franklin Avenue served 183 unique individuals, Stepping Stone served 94, and Central Oregon Villages served 33. And when we're talking about unduplicated clients served, we don't typically add those numbers because people move from shelter to shelter. So we want to make sure that we aren't accidentally duplicating someone. And that would be just individual people throughout the year. And then combined, the shelters supported 73 transitions to permanent housing. This includes rental units, home ownership opportunities. We recently heard that Central Oregon Villages had a client who bought a condo. And then moving in with family or friends for permanent housing situations. And they also supported 70 transitions to temporary housing. And this includes moving in with family or friends for a temporary period, transitional housing programs, and other HUD-defined temporary housing situations. That does not include folks that moved from shelter to shelter. Any questions?
I will add that when we looked at the Navigation Center and we were building that budget when it first opened, and the Navigation Center here was the first one under the legislative action to open and function, we thought 45 people would be the highest number of individuals coming in for daytime services. And consistently, they have just blown that out of the water. And just super grateful for the 30 partners that come in from across the city and support that navigation center to move people on.
Question. Given that we now know the estimate, the reality is different than the estimates were. Do the folks here have any thoughts on, what is the maximum number? What number do we really think, if we had infinite capacity, would we be serving?
I would go back and ask the staff there. I think Shepherd's House and Neighbor Impact would both probably say they would like to serve everyone, but the reality is that they are maxed out right now, and being able to build capacity in any meaningful way is going to take significant time and money. And it just, within our community, our providers are so limited as far as their own staffing. It would be a difficult, I think they're at it, and this is their capacity, and I can't see past that if we can fund those 100 people. I am pleased.
Other questions?
Simple answer would be 900.
Okay.
Is then everyone could have a low barrier walk-up bed, 947, is that the right?
And that's the number off the pick count, right?
That's the number off the pick count.
Of course, not all those individuals would choose those settings, so I imagine that the centers are maybe keeping track of folks they might have to turn away because there's not capacity, or
It is highly unlikely that Shepherd's House will turn people away, which is
Okay.
why we saw last winter them serving up to 137 people.
they just
per
make
night.
it work somehow.
They throw sleeping bags down in offices.
Okay.
It does happen occasionally, but they work very diligently not to put anyone out to the elements. And never a family with minor children.
Yeah.
We've managed to make that not happen.
All right. Good. Questions? Allison or Tony, any questions?
No questions.
All right.
No questions.
All right. Thank you very much.
We have some good news, whereas last month when we came, we're like, well, we may be done in the coming months if we didn't receive sustainable funding for operations of shelter. And so what we received a week and a half ago is notice through COIC that we would be receiving these amounts directly to the shelters, which will cover their operations for the next fiscal year. Instead of the contracts going through the city, they will go through COIC. The city will still supplement with ARPA per the contract, any additional charges, but we are absolutely delighted that this amount will be coming through for each. You may recall that the Franklin Avenue shelter is fully funded through the city's application with COIC for the governor's executive order allocation. And we have added Central Oregon Villages. OHCS has not funded Central Oregon Villages in the past, but this year they'll be putting in 404, which is very, very exciting for that organization. So this is great news. It's only for 1 year, but hey, it is one more year, which we're sure we're gonna have. We're gonna haven't been able to figure out exactly what those amounts are based on. I mean, we have an idea. We've been advocating for a specific amount, and 2 of them are a little bit over, and then Central Oregon Village is a little bit under. So, but we're gonna take it all and just go forward and spend it responsibly. So what we can say is it changes our assumption. The city funds will not be depleted as quickly, and so we can operate fully for the next year into the following. But if OHCS does not come up with a sustainable operational funding, we are boxed in by that ARPA expiration date, which means the funds that the city have allocated have to be spent down by 12/31/2026. And so we've got some time, and the legislature will be convening soon to craft a path forward and help make that happen. So that's where we are. So good news, not as grim. There is a gap in funding. The contracts do not exist right now. And so the city will be stepping forward to pick up the expenses during any gap period. So our partners do not have to close down. while the contracts are being processed. OHCS is optimistic that they will be in place by the end of the month.
Okay. Curious which part of the city budget that's coming from, just getting into the weeds.
So this is an ARPA allocation that was set aside previously.
Okay, so the city's not coming up with that.
This is not general fund dollars, no.
Great.
This is, and there's the match from the county, the 1.5 million that we use in COB, and then also for general shelter operations, it was previously allocated to Franklin.
Okay, so really it's a matter of sequencing until the contracts are in place.
Exactly.
Chair, I'm getting some words from home. When the dais is speaking, can you guys please speak into your mics a little closer? Thank you very much.
Can do.
Thanks.
And Elizabeth.
Okay, this is why I'm here. Somewhat tangentially related to the discussion of shelters is the Supreme Court decided the Grants Pass case, which maybe everyone is aware of. Grants Pass in Oregon had its rules about camping in public property challenged. The case went to the Ninth Circuit and then went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court heard argument in April and issued its decision in June, the end of June. So the Ninth Circuit had found that the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, also prohibited criminal citation and prohibition for camping or sleeping on public property when no other shelter bed was reasonably available, no other place to sleep was reasonably available to the person cited. The Supreme Court rejected that argument and said this is not a question of cruel and unusual punishment. They really focused on the Eighth Amendment history is about what type of punishment. He referenced drawing and quartering and torture as the types of punishments that this clause was aimed at, and that it doesn't apply in the theory behind the Grants Pass challenge was it is a cruel and unusual to punish something that is really inherent to their status. And the court said, no, the Eighth Amendment looks at what the punishment is, not what is being punished. There are other parts of the Constitution that may limit what can be punished, but the Eighth Amendment is not a limitation on that. So under the Eighth Amendment, cities are not prohibited from regulating camping within public property and public rights of way as cruel and unusual punishment. The case has somewhat limited application in Oregon because the state legislature adopted House Bill 3115 in 2021, which is now codified in Oregon statutes, that says that any city law or county law that regulates the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outside on public property open to the public have to be objectively reasonable. We don't know yet from the courts what objectively reasonable rules are about keeping warm and dry, but that's what the statute says. The intent behind the statute, according to the drafters, was to codify the rule from the case that Grants Pass was following, which is a case called Martin v. Boise. So that's what we are under in Oregon, that statute. We're no longer thinking about the Eighth Amendment. We're thinking about this statute and the other elements of the Constitution. And Bend updated its camping code in 2023 to be consistent with this requirement. And that's where we are today. Yes.
Mixed feelings about that, but will we begin potentially to see state statutes being challenged?
This statute allows for challenges to local camping regulations as being not objectively reasonable. And Portland's is challenged right now. The city of Bend has received a notice of challenge over a year ago. We haven't actually been challenged yet. There are other cities in Oregon that are facing challenges as that their camping rules are not objectively reasonable. We just don't have a decision from a court applying that standard yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, cities, it is possible and is happening for cities to be challenged under this statute.
And I don't know whether or not this is, because this did come down quite recently, whether or not the city is the city considering preemptively modifying the City of Bend code on that? Or is the city anticipating staying where they're at and then dealing with challenges and any modifications coming out of them?
Yeah, so like I said, I don't think the Supreme Court decision really, it arose out of a case out of Oregon, but because of this state law that was passed while the Grants Pass case went through the process, I don't see that, I mean, our laws, our regulations are consistent with state law, and there's this federal question is sort of set to one side.
Okay.
And so the state law still applies. We adopted a code that's consistent with the state law, and that's the status quo in Oregon for the time being.
I found it interesting that the majority cited the Oregon law as they discussed their decision, which not necessarily calling it out as an example of how to do things, but we're saying like, here's an example of how the states are taking care of it within the state. And so,
Yeah, an example of local regulation or local control for the majority. It was a 6-3 decision, if anybody is a Supreme Court nerd and wants to know that part.
I think it's caused a lot of concern among people that are experiencing homelessness. And so one message that we're trying to share with providers and in the shelters is Oregon has this umbrella in place and it has been codified. And so at this moment, that's where we stand. And so just that level of fear among people that are particularly vulnerable is pretty high.
Like the case did not criminalize sleeping outside. It just said whether you can is not a question for the Eighth Amendment. So
It's not a federal decision, it's a local decision.
it's not, it didn't affirmatively take any action about rules on camping or sleeping outside.
I will add that Governor Kotek was the primary architect of this bill. And so it's got very strong support when she was speaker. And so it is very strong support within the legislature, but there is some talk about changes. So we'll see.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other shelter questions or? We'll have a final report for you guys hopefully next month.
Exactly. Thank you.
And please remember Navigation Center is having their celebration next week. Everybody should have an invitation to 2 years. And so if you can make it, you will also have an invitation when we move back into the 2nd Street location, which will be really the one to put on your calendar, I think, is as the celebration to be at no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The moment we've all been waiting for. Well, at least Rachel and I.
So first, I hope you all had a chance to skim the plethora of materials I sent you, primarily just mostly to recap meetings we've already had and discussions we've already had, but also to demonstrate for you kind of what other jurisdictions are doing. And that's what I wanted to present to you today. First, we updated some of the slides that we had presented in October. So I'll just kind of go over that information. Here's our annual CDBG award, and the darker shade is how much program income we receive from that award. And you'll see some like higher spikes in 2018 and 2020. Again, that is from our neighborhood or NSP, Neighborhood Stabilization Program funding, coming back in as program income. NSP was a program as a result of the Great Recession that provided lots of opportunity for home ownership or maintaining foreclosed homes. And so we issued out a lot of loans, and then the state required that we hold on to that money and hold on to that money. And then the first time we could reissue it back out to the community was in 2018. They held we held more money from 2018, and the second time we could reissue that was in 2020. So you'll see those spikes in program income on those years. And then after that, the state has allowed us to just continue to revolve that into our CDBG program from here on out. And so we don't have to wait till it builds up anymore. So that just kind of demonstrates those big leaps. And then in 2021, at the start of the pandemic, or 2020, 2021, lots of people were refinancing. And so that created quite a bit of program income. And now we're kind of at like that stable rate of program income, and with interest rates so high, not a whole lot of people are refinancing and not a whole lot of people are moving. And so our program income dollars are kind of depleting. What program income does for public services is it increases the amount of our public services cap. So CDBG is really important to provide public services in our community. And so you'll see, again, kind of those public service dollars being increased as we received more program income. In 2020 and 2021 and even 2022, we received dollars from the CARES Act and the 2020 funding for CDBG. That public services cap was eliminated. And so because of that, we were able to provide way more public services than we can typically. And so you'll see how that spiked in those years. But we're kind of returning to that public service cap of about $80,000 a year, which isn't very much to provide to our community. And so the more program income we received, the higher the cap can be. And then this is our affordable housing fund and the loan repayments we receive from it. And you'll see we get about a third of what we give out every year on average is program income, or not program income, loan repayments. Program income is unique to CDBG. Our loan repayments that we receive and are able to revolve back out into the community for affordable housing development. So after Rooted Homes presented at the last meeting, we went and looked at some of the communities and how much of their CDBG award they received in 2022. We looked at capers. We do a caper every year. We're about to do ours. And so you'll see that next month. It is an annual report on what we have achieved with our CDBG. And so we didn't want to look at like what they allow, but actually what are they doing with their CDBG dollars? So that's why we looked at these jurisdictions capers. And even though some of them allow for land acquisition or DBA or rehab, you will see like what that produces in regards to new units is pretty minimal. And I looked at CDBG only, because many of these jurisdictions also have home funds, and the city of Bend does not have home funds. Home funds are also awarded through HUD. There's a reason why the city of Bend does not have home funds. We could apply for them. However, the home funds that our region gets are through the state. And we have seen that there's so many good projects and developments coming out of our community that often our community is awarded way more in home funds than we would receive if we were an entitlement that received home funds. So we receive way more in home funds from the state than we do if we were to be a home entitlement. And it's kind of a balancing act that could tip. And so we kind of look at that and hem and haws, should we become a home jurisdiction at like anything less than $500,000? I don't think it's worth it, because often we're getting home funds in greater amounts than that for the great developments that we produce here. So that's kind of the decision point. We can always talk about that in the future. And I anticipate we will definitely be talking about it as we do the pathways to remove obstacles housing work. That grant will require us to look at our resources and see how we're developing and why we're developing with the resources we have, and if home is important enough for us to pursue. We also, kind of dug in. I emailed a lot of these jurisdictions to see what they were doing. A lot of them have put their down payment assistance programs on hold and aren't providing DPA, or in metro areas and where they have more of a consortium, that's like a county that might provide resources of HUD funding to multiple cities. They're often giving like down payment assistance directly to nonprofit organizations that build the houses, that fund the down payment assistance, the whole shebang. Organizations like Proud Ground in Portland, that's where Jackie came from, who presented to us. So it's also just very different than what we do here. And not that we can't award subrecipients that type of funding, but there's no organization that's doing that right now. So if Habitat or Rooted Homes or Neighbor Impact or Housing Works were to create a loaning type of fund, we could contribute to that. They could be subrecipients to our CDBG dollars. So it's possible. It's just not happening in our community at the moment. And then you can see like Bend was comparable in accomplishments with CDBG funds to Eugene and Springfield. But the funding that they have is vastly more than what we have. But we're still kind of creating the same amount of units, which is pretty remarkable with our CDBG dollars. I'll just say that and emphasize that. Portland has a bond. So when you go to Portland's website and see what they are doing, it's pretty incredible, pretty remarkable. And then a lot that happens in other jurisdictions is rehab or affordable housing preservation funding. And we're allowed to do that in our comp plan. We just don't have very many applications for that. Housing Works has had CDBG funds for rehab in the past. And I'm sure that if they needed to update any one of their developments, they would come and apply for it. But we just don't have a whole lot of rehab projects in front of us. And that's kind of it. Any questions for me or?
A clarification, the reason we don't have very many rehab projects being proposed, my assumption is that that's because we have a pretty limited stock of aging units that would need a rehab. I want to make sure I'm correct on that.
I would say after our last comp plan and our last analysis of impediments to fair housing, we heard a lot of home and disrepair experiences. So I'm more concerned that we don't have an organization operating rehab opportunities. So it's how do we create that capacity?
You probably already said this and I probably missed it. Are those rehab opportunities specific to housing that is already designated as affordable, or is that those opportunities available to any housing and then it becomes designated affordable?
It could be designated to any household that meets affordable eligibility criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and to answer your first question, Ian, our affordable housing stock relative to the rest of the state is very young. Our overall housing stock may have some issues, but the affordable housing stock is just not that old, so there's not a lot of rehab going on.
That makes sense. And so what I'm hearing is those rehab dollars could be applied to housing that is not currently designated as affordable if the household qualifies.
Correct.
Can that be applied to households that are in rental housing or only home ownership?
I mean, I think the landlord would have to enter into a deed restriction to commit to keeping it affordable if it was a landlord opportunity. But also, I think there's lots of homeowners that are in our community that have, you know, now on fixed income or just in a economic state where they might need rehab to their housing.
Okay. Has the city seen any applications for rehabs of homes or housing units where folks are renting? I don't recall hearing about that over the course of my time on AHAC.
But again, it would have to be a program or an organization applying for that.
Thank you.
That is willing to do that kind of work. That's where we
Since we don't have
need
it,
that.
I haven't seen one.
probably capacity building
Okay.
is what's needed.
Thank you for bearing with my questions.
I think both habitat and neighbor impact, I don't think Housing Works has a history of this, have done like weatherization or ADA assistance programs, but I don't think they have those up and running at the moment.
Okay.
Quick point of clarification. Last consultation with Neighbor Impact, they said that the demand was typically in the county or outside of the actual city limits of Bend. They serve the Tri-County area with various rehab programs and don't typically have enough money to serve that need. The last time the city offered a ramp program under ADA, it was not utilized at all. That was before my time, but remember getting phone calls about it in my previous position. And do you know anyone who needs this? So I don't know if that helps, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Other folks, questions for Rachel on that? Allison, start with you. Any questions?
Nope, thank you.
All right. Folks here, up to the left, any questions?
I have one. It might be kind of a dumb question, but can you define for me what public services means? Like what falls under that rubric?
It has a federal definition.
Okay.
So that would be, probably it's easier for me to just give examples.
Yeah.
Thrive Central Oregon, the Loft, things that we've funded is what I'm trying to think
Okay,
here.
I gotcha. Thank you. It was such
Neighbor
so
impact.
general. I was like, what does that mean? So thank you for clarifying
Yeah,
for me.
it's essentially assisting people
Yeah.
with their needs and not necessarily towards the creation of housing
Understood. Thank you, Rachel.
or any kind of building or development.
Okay, thanks.
But those services must specifically serve low income. You know, they have to meet the threshold
Sure.
in terms of who they're reaching.
Yeah, they have to be willing to gather income information from the households that they serve.
Got it. Thanks, guys.
All right, folks, all right, any questions?
Just one that's kind of maybe anecdotal, but do you have a sense of the program income or payments being received? How much of that is just down payment assistance loans coming back in versus other types of loans that are?
I would say it's a balance. Yeah, I would say it's a good mix, like just having received all these in the last few years. A lot was NSP in those at like the start of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then it's been more kind of down payment assistance and other types of loans. So it's a good mix. Yeah. And then the Affordable Housing Fund is pretty steady.
Right.
And that can be like land acquisitions. Those are usually developers paying those funding back because it's repayment for land acquisitions or repayments for construction loans. So next steps is if you want to consider changing our grants and loans policy, that would be like a yes or no moving forward. And then if you do want to do that, how do you want that to look? Do you want to break up in a subcommittee and bring ideas back to the group? Or do you want to continue to discuss as this body? If we continue to discuss as this body, then we would probably take up 2 more meetings and staff would come back to you with ideas that you would like to see or generate ideas from you that you would like to see. And then you would make a decision of kind of how you would like to change those grant versus loans policies. And then we would have to take that to council.
Folks on the committee, thoughts on anyone? Thoughts on how you'd like to proceed?
I guess I just have some questions, comments.
Great.
Have there been any projections of what would happen with the funding, current level fundings, if we moved to grants? I understand it'll go down, but by how much? And how quickly?
I think that's what's impossible to predict because I'll go back to the slideshow.
And the developments that are funded and what have you, but I guess assuming a repeat of something similar to the last couple of years.
Be like it's like $100,000. And that's.
So as you can see, we didn't get any program income yet for this year. For the most part. I know we have, but it's just not like on the scale of what we have received. So I think that's really hard to determine, particularly with high interest rates. What that would look like in the very near future if we.
So it could slow down, with no change to policy, essentially.
I anticipate that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. In the memo I have from City of Bend from December, it notes they anticipate a $100,000 to $200,000 per year. It's from
Decrease.
that's the impact to available funds on an annual basis based on the way the program is currently set up. And I'll look to Rachel to make sure I quoted that correctly.
Which 20% of that would be for administration of the program, 15% of that would be public services.
Yes.
The remainder would go back out.
I think it's just a really tough conversation to have without additional resources. But it is a conversation that pathways to remove obstacles will certainly. For housing, our grant will certainly continue to have.
Well, just one more thing, if I may.
Please, please.
The chart you shared with us, it's really telling, like, yes, there's a whole lot of grants going on, but there's no housing units being produced.
With only CDBG
Only
funds.
right. It's only rehab and we're actually building some units, so. Making some of these comparisons is a little difficult too.
If I'm reading this chart correctly, to follow up on your question, reading this chart correctly, the number of new housing units, the column second from the right, that's indicating that those projects would have been funded in their entirety by CDBG with no other funds.
With no home funds.
Got it. Yeah, I can see why there aren't very many of them. Pretty narrow window to hit.
Well, the money doesn't go very far, so
Right.
you can leverage CDBG with other stuff.
Right, and that's my
get
expectation is
some
that
events done.
there are units that aren't showing up here
Right,
because there are other funds involved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
much more significant funds from the state, so in terms of subsidy. Yeah.
Mhm.
And our caper, with regards to CDBG, doesn't show a ton of units from CDBG. I think the most we've ever had was Legacy Landing. Because that was a result of a CDBG land acquisition. But the down payment assistance we give is pretty significant compared to other jurisdictions. And that was what really came out of our research. Many jurisdictions aren't giving DPA. Or if they are, it's directly through an organization that they give the money to. Tigard said, we give our entire CDBG program amount to Proud Ground for them to do their work.
Which would not be down payment assistance.
No, it could be down payment assistance, it
Through
could be
there.
land acquisition, but they give their entire program dollars to Proud Ground to do home ownership development.
As they see fit. for their
Mhm.
community.
I mean, and that meets CDBG regulations, but yeah.
Of course.
We actually don't accept public comment at this time.
That's Rachel. So I bring in the Portland's programs.
So-
Happy to comment if you.
I'm not sure if we can, it's not on the agenda.
But we can talk afterwards.
Yeah,
and we can, yeah.
we absolutely love your feedback through the right channel. So it sounded like, from what you said, Rachel, we have functionally two options, well, kind of three options. this body can choose to not address the topic further. We can have a subcommittee that works through the issue and comes back to this group with a recommendation or series of discussions, or we can discuss it as this group is here. Am I capturing all the options here, Rachel? Do I have discussion from the committee on how we'd like to proceed? Please.
I'm curious on the work that Rachel's alluded to that needs to happen as part of this grant. Sounds like there's probably going to be some opportunities perhaps that are identified there, and I'm not sure we want to have a parallel process of that, if that makes sense.
Agreed. In terms of timing, how far off is that?
Yeah, this work is gonna be further out.
Further out.
So if you wanted anything sooner, we can still continue these conversations. If you want anything to be tweaked in the policy that we have, we can continue to have those conversations. We could always invite Carl back too, to talk more
Not
about
sure
what
whether-
Portland is.
Yeah.
Like years out.
This year's out, no, but probably a year of planning
Yeah.
to really implement it.
Yeah,
I would absolutely would like to make sure that we invite him to speak with us at our next meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Other thoughts from the committee of the three options? What do we like? And so if I'm understanding just sequencing wise, if we were to wait for the information and data coming out of the processes funded by that grant, our decision today would be to make no change. Is that correct?
I mean, if you made no change, we would probably still talk about it in that
Well, yeah.
process, yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
If we decided to defer to like a subcommittee, would the subcommittee be amongst ourselves or would you, okay.
Once you're volunteering, there's lots of opportunities to volunteer.
Yeah, see that.
I think you should probably maybe just make a decision on whether or not you want to further discuss changing the policy or not.
That is, I think, where we're at. I'll look to Allison just to make sure we're including you. Allison, any thoughts or comments?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm inclined to keep things the way they are. That's kind of the way I'm leaning. But I'm open to further discussion or
All right, so
the thoughts that it could be in the
towards leaving things the way they are, but you would like further discussion on the committee?
not necessarily, I mean, I'd like to hear from other community members right now, I guess, and see if the leaning one gets in another.
Okay, great, thank you.
Tony has a question.
And Tony, you're not up on the screen, so I want to make sure we call on you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if I get this right, I mean, the money, when it's a loan, it's coming back, you know, and it could be coming back like 4 years, 5 years, 10 years from now as it gets paid back. I mean, is that correct?
Yes.
With the CBG funds and everything else. So, I mean, putting it out as a grant, I mean, yeah, it solves the problem immediately, but it doesn't like keep our cash flow coming in consistently, right? Because, I mean, politics will ebb and flow what type of funds are getting kicked down, you know, from the state and federal level, right? I guess that's what I would say, that to keep it the way it is.
Right.
That would be, I guess, my 2 cents on it.
Great, thank you. Other folks on the dais, thoughts? Jeff?
I have a few. So I tend to agree with Heather, like if this is going to be explored by city staff, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to do additional work. But my vote would be for a subcommittee of some sort. And this is why. I think when I read the policy, it felt like we were trying to create one policy for all types of funds, which makes sense from a standpoint of administration and things like that. But I think the money is very different. When I look at it from the developer standpoint, they're very different types of funds. And there's reasons why we pursue certain types of funds over other types of funds, and sometimes that involves whether it's a loan or a grant. And I think
What interjection? When you say we, are you talking about this body or?
developers.
Developers, great. Thank you.
Developers,
Just want to
yeah.
make sure I was understood.
And so I think section 6 of the policy allows a lot of flexibility, which I think was probably intentional and but I guess I just like an example would be using CDBG for acquisition. And if you acquire a piece of land with CDBG and you put 60 years of affordability on that land with a covenant, to me, that's a great use of that money. And if making it a loan impedes that land acquisition, then the policy has a problem, right? So, and I know, again, there's provisions in there that say you can ask for special circumstances. I just think that maybe under certain circumstances, it could be a grant, and then in other circumstances, it should be a loan. When I look through all the policies or samples that you sent out, Gresham, I think, had a very interesting tiered structure in terms of equity, shared appreciation, where the city is getting money back, but it is sort of turning into a grant over long term. We talked about if you do an additional period of affordability, maybe the loans are forgiven. I don't know that that's clear in our existing policy. So I think there's opportunity there to maybe refine some of it.
Do you have thoughts on how you'd like to proceed with that refinement?
Like I said, my vote would be a subcommittee that would explore it. But if the city is going to do it anyway, then maybe we wait for that to happen. I don't know that there's a sense of urgency. The other clarification I have, I think when Rooted came in, they were asking for some sort of retroactive change, if I remember right. And I guess my question would be, does section 6 allow modifications after the fact? Or is it just when you come in to ask for them?
That's a great question for either Rachel or Elizabeth.
I mean, I think the policy for community land trust was written that we would revisit in year 20 of their loan. And so I don't think it's set in stone that they have to pay it back.
Right.
So yeah, I think we have to clarify that.
That makes sense. Because it certainly sounds like a number of Rooted's concerns are both about the way that money shows up on their balance sheet,
correct,
impacting other projects, as well as the ongoing cost of single audit.
Mm-hmm.
So that my sense is they would prefer to see that resolved sooner than 17 years from now.
Correct.
I think that was the request.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I don't recall, when did we last revisit our grants loan policy?
2 years ago, I think.
No, it was further back than that. I want to say 2018, 2019.
Okay.
We discussed it since I've been on the committee though.
Well, we've discussed it every year, but we haven't changed anything since.
Right. So I suppose
2019.
when you say revisit, when was the last time we made a change, or when was the last time we talked?
Well, the last revisiting that I recall since I've been on the committee, we posed the question, do we need changes? And we chose not to change it. So
Yes.
I'm asking that because I agree, if there's an opportunity to clarify problematic areas in the policy, why would we wait to do that? On the other side, I don't want us to be too reactive with these policies, because for a variety of reasons, for both the city, for developers, for everyone involved, because it'll then become really hard to keep track of all of these things. And I want to be mindful of, we've received requests for change from one entity, and they are an important partner in this community. So I don't want to make it sound like it's not important that we listen to that, but we just heard from another community partner that would prefer things stay the same. So far, that's just two partners with disparate views. So I'm just thinking about that. I'm not opposed to a subcommittee. There's probably no harm in that. But I also, I am curious about what will happen with this too, and do people need to spend their time on a subcommittee? So that's no answer on my preference for moving forward.
No. Well, hearing that so far, at this point in the discussion, do we have a motion? Robert says you need a motion to move forward.
I'm not ready to, I mean, I'm not opposed to a subcommittee, but I'm not ready to motion for it. I feel the same, like more information, good. But is it like, are we in the moment right now where we want to go forward with and gather more information, or is that forthcoming? It seems like it's forthcoming. So I'm not prepared to make a motion. Sorry.
It's already involved. So it looks like no one's providing a motion, which means that we will keep things as they are. Rachel, what kind of additional information could be available a month from now
I
to
think
discuss?
we could still have Carl come and speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you all about.
You guys want to hear more information?
That'd be great.
We would
And
very
then-
much like that.
And once he speaks, then just continue to ask me, email me, like if there's more that you want, I can certainly do research analysis and bring that information back to you. And we're hoping this will help us even do more of that in-depth research and information.
All right, excellent. So let's keep this item on the agenda for next month. I'll ask Carl to come back and give us the information that he has hard-learned lessons on. All right.
Well, let's first make sure, are you available the second Wednesday of August? Because you could come back in September, but I just want to make sure.
That is the 13th of, no, 14th of August. Okay. Well,
There you go.
then I'd ask the committee members, please do, as you have questions, please do send them to Rachel. Please do not send them to everyone on the committee. But please do reach out. Let's try to have as informed a conversation as possible, and potentially we'll just revisit this in September and not in August.
Yes, and if you do ask me a question and I don't answer what you are looking for, just let me know that. So I think Heather asked me last night, what are other jurisdictions doing? I shot her a quick email because I knew I was presenting it, but if I didn't answer what you were looking for, let me know.
I would have asked again.
Thank you.
Very
Rachel.
direct.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. That was great discussion. Barriers to development follow-up is the next item on our agenda. One moment, let me take a note. And somehow it has my name on it instead of someone from city staff, so I guess I'll take this one. First off, I want to acknowledge the tremendous work and actually pretty remarkable volume of work that city and stakeholders have done over the last 4 years. To my mind, from my professional view, sort of in the construction and building industry, I'd say there's a lot fewer barriers to development right now than there were. Many barriers that were there have been addressed. And so I want to start the conversation by saying that's really fantastic. That's a lot of good work accomplished. And work that really, I believe, impacts our community. And so I want to, anytime we're going to have a conversation about all the ways things could be better, I think it's important to acknowledge the work that has gone on already. And so I want to be very specific in the fact that in my time on this committee, I've seen the city of Bend and stakeholders address a lot of the barriers that got brought up, and that's fantastic. So the comments, notes, and input that we received from our June meeting, I believe you all have one, or depending on how many times I hit the send button, a couple copies of those. we had quite a bit of input from folks who are very much on a day-to-day basis trying to make affordable development happen in our community. We didn't have very much time for discussion. We really just had time for their presentations, and some of the presentations had a lot of information that I certainly wasn't able to digest in a timely fashion for the meeting last month. I'd ask that we really respect their time and respect the thoughtful input that they brought by having a conversation on it and talking about how can we continue to remove barriers as they exist in this community to affordable development. So we'll open that up to anyone who has thoughts on the topic, and let's hopefully have a robust discussion. I'll start online, just checking in. Tony, I don't know if your hand is up or not. Sorry, my view doesn't show me that. Any thoughts or anything you'd like to lead with?
Does he have a hand raised?
No.
Okay.
He doesn't. Okay. Great.
Before we have that conversation, I just need to give a little background of how we got here, if that's okay. And kind of where things are at too. So first I want to acknowledge the work that Carrie has done over the last year. In June of last year, she held a stakeholder meeting at one of our city facilities, and stakeholders came and talked about what they were experiencing. She put together an entire list kind of out from that meeting of ideas, and has been working with city staff internally to address some of those things that were brought. Some of those things were quick code changes that happened in the fall last year. And then internally, the city has continued to talk about that list and those things. That is kind of what brought forth the developers that shared some experiences. Some of those topics that you all are about to discuss, we will have city meetings on in the very near future, public meetings. So we'll send you out, and I think we might mention in staff reports, some discussions on sidewalks for connectivity that are happening next month in our council subcommittee meetings. In addition, internally, we're looking at code changes to those middle housing land division discussions that were brought forth to you. The middle income tax exemption was presented to council and will be going in front of hopefully taxing districts in the very near future. And so we will send you that information when Carrie and I take our proposal to those taxing districts. I would say that expedited review for projects not phase by phase and extended SDC deferrals will probably need to be more of a heavier lift. More of are these decisions that council wants to make or council wants before them. And then Lynn, did you want to speak to the other?
Yeah, so we did a little bit of research on using the general fund as full faith and credit when this came up a few months ago by the same development team. And our leadership team reached out to our bond counsel at that time to inquire if they had heard of other jurisdictions in Oregon doing this in any way and what would it take, et cetera. Our bond counsel, who also represents Metro in Portland and Portland for their bonds, and is seen as some of the leaders, I'd say, if not the leaders in the state at advising on this work, did not see an obvious way because of our constitutional provisions about how public funding can be used in Oregon for this type of thing to happen without a public vote. They said they were willing to research it, but they are not cheap. And so with this particular item, I think as we look forward at potential revenue options long-term as part of the HUD Pro Housing Grant, and as we have talked about, I think, in this group in various times, if the group is interested in pursuing this as an option, I think it would be a really interesting exercise. But this is large enough that it would have to be authorized by council through something like council goals, because there will be expenditures on legal fees for our great team to advise us on the ways through. And we're just not sure if it's even possible to do without an actual voter approval, like a bond.
I think we covered everything on the list. All right.
Ellen, thoughts?
I don't have any at the moment.
Jeff? Usually come with your homework done.
I mean, I read through them all, and I think, just acknowledge some of the creative thought that's going on in the for-profit world, I guess, to try and create more affordable housing is nice. Even if we can't do all the ideas that were put forward. But I think some of them seemed pretty straightforward to me, and it sounds like those are already being worked on. In my opinion, anytime you can get, expedited review, or SDC relief or proration or tax exemption, in exchange for a covenant for affordability, I don't see why you wouldn't do it, right? So as long as the mechanisms are set up to guarantee that affordability, I'm all for, incentivizing for-profit developers to create more of it. And I think that theme kind of ran through all the documents. But it wasn't clear whether they, that they're willing to accept that covenant. I think that's the important piece, right? And so I think, and I tend to agree with Lynn. I think the city either buying or owning land and or giving financial guarantees feels a little risky in my opinion with some of those suggestions.
Rachel, can you say again which of these ideas the city is actually working on getting more information or?
Sidewalks for connectivity,
Okay.
middle income land division, middle income tax exemption. Oh, yeah, that's it.
Rachel, what are the timelines of which we might hear about those things the city's working on? Within a quarter.
We
one
could
quarter,
probably get
4
that
quarters?
information to you at the next AHAC meeting.
Okay. All right.
It's something we're continually working to try and get to.
All right.
Is there? So I'm not sure there's necessarily any value for us affirming the city's continue to work on that because it may not be needed on those strategies or it's.
I mean, you could affirm it at a council check-in too.
When's our next council check-in?
Next week.
Do you think the timeline of that information coming to us could be sped up if more resources were allocated to it? Because they're important issues, and I don't think this committee wants to wait 2 years. I don't think it'll be 2 years, but by applying more resources, could that information come to us for us to make recommendations to council sooner?
If I may, Chair, and I apologize to everybody for being virtual today. It's one of those days in my household. I believe that the city manager is prioritizing many of the issues on this list very seriously. There are a lot, we've kind of picked the low-hanging fruit. And so what's left, the issues both within this list and that we will continue to talk about through each of your tenure are the messy ones. They're the ones that take a lot of cross-departmental coordination, a lot of time from really leadership in the organization, across the teams, legal team, finance, et cetera. So I do believe that there's a lot of priority. I think we could work with the chair or whoever else is interested on crafting some sort of support letter for ongoing work on that. But I don't want to give folks the impression that it's not a priority at all within the city. There's sort of some refinement within that larger statement, I'll say, of just continuing on with the good work that's happening. Rachel, do you think that's fair?
Absolutely. And I do think that some of those items that aren't low hanging fruit will be potentially like put forth in front of council as like the next council comes. So if you're looking for a timeline, that's why I'm not giving you something concrete, because we're about to hit an election. And so as those council goals are formed, these would be suggestions for those council goals. And that's what you might want to put forth at that time.
Okay. And if memory serves, Tony is going to be doing the council check-in next week. Is that?
Yep, I had signed up from that last month, so I have it done on my calendar.
So.
And that'll be, yep.
Rachel and Lynn, I'm referring to the notes we have from Carrie on the feedback from developers document. It looks like there are about 80% of these are noted as this was brought up last year and remains on a current list of barriers.
Yeah,
I absolutely appreciate city manager's office working on them. Is there anything that makes sense? Is there anything that makes sense for this group to do to help move them forward? Or I'll ask this group, on this list of feedback, are there ones that we specifically want to ask council to prioritize their work on? That's a pretty general question to get a yes to.
well, I think it's a good question. I think I like what they're focusing on, and I think what you're highlighting is like maybe, I mean, I feel like what we could do is potentially and have Tony or even this body write a letter affirming that we really do think it's important for them to be focusing on these issues. And maybe if we want to add any to what they're currently focusing on, we could include that. I just think I think it would be a good idea for them to hear affirmation from us that we agree that they should be considering this, and maybe an encouragement to, you know, push it along for lack of a better word. I don't want to like put them to a timeline given the election, but I do think that, you know, anything that we can say to encourage their work on this would be beneficial, right, Lynn?
Yeah, I think yes, you are welcome to do that, and we will help you craft that letter for Tony or some talking points for Tony to bring forward at the committee council check-in next week. I would just encourage us to also continue to reflect on the great work that you all have done and this council and former councils in removing barriers already in the context of that larger conversation, because there's so much work ongoing within the city. So that's really my only caveat, is absolutely weigh in if you all see that that's these items are things that you would like us to continue on, the ones that are mentioned as underway. That will help. I think we could always provide tracking, as Rachel mentioned, next month and ongoing of the progress of that, but don't want at any point you all to, or city manager to feel like you all are raining down on them when the work is ongoing, if that makes sense. So that's the balance I'm trying to find here and what I'm saying to you all. I hope that makes sense, but absolutely we can craft that with you.
All right. I don't believe we probably have time between now and that meeting next week for a letter to be drafted and then reviewed and approved by the committee. If drafting a letter is something the committee is interested in, I think we would need to select a person or potentially two people to work with staff to do that. Is that something the committee wants to do? Also, individual committee members can absolutely reach out to council directly, but to have the weight of this committee behind it, we'd need acquiescence, I believe, from everyone. Thoughts?
I'm just mulling the you know, if we have Tony
Yeah.
discussing, sort of expressing our support for the city's continued attention to issues that have been identified, both through city activities and the chamber and others that have done a lot of stakeholder work. You know, I think that sends a pretty strong message.
I agree.
And I think the other piece of this too is, for me anyways, it's not just like staying on the city to make sure,
No.
you know, there is a lot of time and energy and knowledge and candid thoughts, right, that went into identification of strategies. And I think probably the larger community would just benefit from knowing that the city is actually working on these things. It doesn't just live in a document somewhere on someone's laptop. It's like, we are taking action with these things. It is moving forward. They take time. There's feasibility studies, there's this and there's that needs to happen. But I think just having the conversation at the check-in kind of keeps it alive.
Yeah.
And perhaps we could encourage the city and just share with them that there's an interest by those stakeholders and kind of periodic check-ins, right, on what progress is being made so that people don't have a perception, you know, otherwise. So.
Yeah, I agree. Because reading this document, it's like, well, this was brought up last year and this was brought up. It's like, okay, well, what is the status? You know, a small report, I think would show what you're talking about, Heather. I like that.
Makes sense to me.
And would it be better to draft a letter when the new city council comes in?
Maybe both. My input.
Yeah, I think my sort of recommendation to you all would be if there's agreement in what Helen and Heather were discussing just now, we can work with you on that for next week and potentially put it into Tony's talking points for council, just reaffirming, because next week's topic, and I'll talk about this in a second in staff report, is growth and housing. And so you are right on point in those talking points that you just discussed. In addition, we will be starting the council goal setting process very soon, incredibly soon, considering that the election is not until November. But in September, I think staff were thinking that might be the right meeting to bring back some of the bigger topics that you all have heard about over the last year and consider whether you'd like to try to move those forward as council goal items for the new council and the new biennium. So that's kind of that might be the game plan if I'm perceiving correctly what folks are saying.
And there will be another committee council in October.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious here. These topics and these items here, do any of them get addressed as part of the pro housing funds? Will they be tackled as part of that, or is this separate from that?
I mean, the Pathways to Remove Obstacles Housing Grant. I'm gonna say it every time.
Good, do it.
Yeah, that's what it's about. It is certainly like part of that funded plan or application was to identify those obstacles. And if these are true obstacles, you know, the city should be potentially taking a look at them, and that needs to be identified in that plan or that assessment that will be funded through that grant.
Okay.
Perfect. Good question.
Yep. All right. Well, there's no more discussion from the committee on the current point of barrier removal. I think let's move on to the next point because we're already 3/4 of the way there. All right. Melissa, I think. Excellent.
Hello, everybody. You all set the stage so well for me because you're.
Hand raised. I'm not sure if he wants to say something.
Yeah, thank you. I can't see that. Tony, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't sit on. Sorry about that.
All good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So yes, you set the stage for me because of the regular conversations about obstacles and barriers to housing that is the point of the grant that we received. And we have an important update for you, as most of you already know by the giant check behind me. Bend was recently notified that we are one of 21 awardees in the United States and District of Columbia to receive funding from this first round of competitive grant funding. I want you to understand how big of a deal this is, because this is the first type of competitive grant from HUD of this type. And I don't know why this is advancing. I think my hands are too excited. But anywho, 175 applications were received and we were one of 21 selected. And the purpose of the grant, as Rachel mentioned, is to identify barriers and make plans to address them. In addition, we have other plans that we'll talk about, but I want to just recognize how much work you as a committee has done already in advancing the city through barrier removal. When we were at the check dedication, Solomon Green, who has, and these are his words, not mine, the longest title in the world. He is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Development and Research with HUD. He said that what they were looking for with this grant is funding cities who have already made significant progress in identifying and removing barriers, but still have some way to go. So they didn't necessarily want to fund folks who were at ground zero, and they didn't want to fund folks that were done. And so we just want to recognize the work that you have done as a committee to help us get there. So thank you for that. It's just a map of what states had awardees. We were the only awardee in the state of Oregon. And this is a visual of the different cities and the funding amount that they received. I want to do some bragging, but I'm not going to, because the graphic kind of just tells you a great story. I'm going to go back into my humble space. So in the grant application, one of the questions that we were asked is, if you receive half of the award, what could you do? And if you remember, when I came and sat before you in October, we requested 10 million, and we came up with a very grand project for 10 million. And this is cut and paste from my application, because we said, well, if we receive 5 million, this is maybe what we can do. So while I'm showing you this cut and paste from my application, I want you to understand that scaling a project from 10 million to 5 million is going to take some time and some reevaluation of budget. In addition, because we wrote the grant in October, we need to reevaluate what's been done internally since October, what things have changed in the market and in the industry, so that we can properly rescale our work. So more to come. When Mr. Green came to Bend, we had arranged a couple things. The first thing is we took a tour around town, and he was so interested in our work and had very intentional, thoughtful questions. So just a few stops of the tour. 2 of these photos, actually all 3 of these photos came from his LinkedIn page. That's how much he enjoyed the tour. So thank you to the partners, our homeownership partners, and Hayden Homes that were hosted stops along the way. And then the next day we had the check presentation, and it was such a party. We closed down the streets and had a big party. So it was really wonderful. Thank you so much for the AHAC members that were able to make it. And so that's just what I wanted to update you. More information will be coming, because now that we've received the notification that we've been chosen to receive funding, now the work begins. First the scaling, and then I always think of hula hoops. We got to pick up the hula hoops and get them going, but that'll take a little bit of time. Any questions?
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
It's a huge win for our community.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Will there be an opportunity for folks to pose with you and the check later?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you.
Those photos will go nowhere.
Yeah, I asked about the routing number. They insisted that it not be printed on the check. I think that's very odd myself. All right, staff report.
Then
am expecting Lynn to do that.
Hi, sorry. Can't, come on, camera. There it is. Sorry about that, everyone. So only a couple items today. As we discussed, next week is the committee council check-in. I believe it's Wednesday, the 17th, I believe is the date. And it starts at 3 o'clock, typically 3 to 5 is the committee council check-in. It'll be an overview. Each quarter, we focus on a different goal area topic. And this time is affordable housing and sustainable development. The focus will be on the growth plan and how Bend grows from here. Should be very, very on point and pertinent to your work, and great opportunity for you to find out a little more about what the plan is, where we're going from here over the next potentially 20 years of planning work, and be ready to provide feedback on that if we receive another presentation at AHAC about that information, so that you all are able to track and follow along. That will affect our work plan over the next number of years. Thank you again to Tony for volunteering. Staff will work to ensure that you're prepared next week. In addition, there is a stewardship subcommittee. These are council subcommittees were created to help provide additional time for counselors, not in a quorum, just a minority of members, to really workshop issues that needed more time than they have, post 8 o'clock on the dais on certain Wednesdays. So we created council subcommittees as a place for additional workshopping of topics. This next one is Monday, July 22nd from 11:30 to 1. And we'll be talking about what Councillor Campbell affectionately, and now we all affectionately call the tiny TIF. That is the site-by-site urban renewal concept that you all heard about from Jonathan and Rachel a little while back. And we're continuing to workshop that and options for making that functional to continue to promote development opportunities in the city. So that one's getting pretty technical, but is also a really interesting and innovative program, in my opinion. Jonathan has done some phenomenal work along with Rachel and others to make sure that that's going to be workable for us. So again, Monday, July 22nd, 11:30 is the tiny TIF. I wanted to let this group know also I will be away from my desk and not checking email or voicemail or text for the next couple weeks. So Rachel and Amy and Dina and the rest of the staff are here to receive any calls or needs that you may have. For the public, we do have the email address housing@bendoregon.gov. That's always a great place to refer folks if you're not really sure who to connect them to in the housing department. That's checked by multiple folks and routed appropriately from there. So staff, did I miss any items for staff report?
I don't think so. If there's anything that comes up, we'll email.
Thank you all. Good discussion today.
Okay, great. Thank you all, and that is the end of our agenda, except for whatever happens in break.
Thank you. I was just reflecting on the public comment we heard this morning concerning the tree code. And I'm wondering, I just kind of wanted to close the loop on that is.
Thank you, I forgot.
What could or should we do with that information? Is that an easy ask to permit that additional flexibility of those options? I don't know what the ramifications are of that, or why we wouldn't necessarily support that, but.
May I approach?
Please go ahead.
Just in time.
This very well may be the highest number of Ians ever up here.
Since the last meeting?
Yeah.
Ian Lighthizer, City Attorney's Office. I'm just sort of guest observing today. Probably a good time to note that I heard, I think, the tail end of those comments about both the tree preservation, the updates to the development code, and then some comments about new city standards and specs regarding right-of-way landscaping. So on the first, the tree code, those changes mostly are to the development code following a legislative land use process. That is fairly precise in the sense of having a defined process with a record that is open for a certain period and then closed. The record, for that matter, the legislative record, closed at the first reading, which occurred at the June 20th council meeting. So although the second reading of that ordinance occurs at the council meeting next week on the 17th, the legislative record is closed and there wasn't a request to keep it open. So that is not me saying that people can't still talk about it, but the COBA representative that was here did have an opportunity to talk about it, did place those concerns and issues into the record before council for council to consider. That happened while the record was open, and council made some changes to the code amendments, did not take up that particular issue, but they did hear it. They had an opportunity to hear it. The record's now closed. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't discuss it. I'm rarely going to stand up and tell an advisory body they can't discuss something, but the record's closed, and to your question, there isn't really a way to forward that onto council. And I mean, I would submit that the need doesn't really exist because council heard it directly from COBA already, and then the record closed.
On both matters.
So that's on the legislative issue, the tree code amendments. The other issue on amendments to the city standards and specifications regarding right-of-way landscaping was also an agenda item at the June 20th council meeting. That issue was addressed through a separate agenda item, a separate process. It's a resolution of the city council. That resolution was adopted. Resolutions only need one reading. So that is also effectively over and done with, albeit through a different process. And I would say a less formal process than a legislative land use proceeding. I will say that there was a lot of discussion at the council meeting, particularly on the changes to the tree preservation standards in the development code that recognized that this is new for Bend. There was a lot of gravity, even among people who testified who had concerns about certain aspects of the code. There was a lot of gravity, I'm paraphrasing and summarizing, even among those folks, that this was a step in the right direction. But there was also recognition from the council and staff that we would have to see how this goes. So part of what council did in adopting the first reading of the ordinance on the tree code amendments at the last meeting was to direct staff to come back in a year with data on how this is working. What impact is this having on projects, on applications, on overall housing production? So I can tell you that there are city staff that are very excited to be moving into that phase because we all want to know how this is going to work. And I think that's a long way of saying it's possible that things could be adjusted in a year or so once we have some data on how this actually plays out, because the way those amendments are going to work and influence development applications are actually what gets built is so site specific, so project specific. It's a little bit hard to know how it's going to play out. So that's the plan at this point. But it was curious to me to hear these concerns from COBA today because they had already raised them to council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Wait, Lynn has her hand up.
Lynn, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to what Ian Lighthizer just said. Ian number 3 or 1, I don't know how we're counting. For a term, now that you all are in seats, hopefully for a little while, I think we could look forward, and not today, not asking for volunteers today, but to have some potential assignments from AHAC to follow Planning Commission and other work that's ongoing in some of these longer range committees. We had appointed a now former member who was on AHAC when she began, Kathy Austin, to sort of represent the group's vision, I'll say, in balancing the need for trees and also for housing. That was because of the turnover and sort of capacity of the group, but I think later this summer, maybe September, we might come back to you all and ask for folks to sort of be assigned to some of these longer range things, see if there's a couple of you that may want to do that. And then you all can provide sort of that feedback loop and be the technical experts. This one was a tough one in that because of this turnover and because of the depth of time that the committee spent doing this work, it wasn't the right time for AHAC to be just fully engaged in it. But I think that we are getting back to that point where we'd love to have members engage in some of this work going forward. So I did want to kind of plant that seed for you that staff may be asking for some volunteers to engage in some other activities. Tree coats kind of wrapping, but as we move forward to make sure you have the ability to comment and provide feedback a little bit earlier too.
Thank you, Lynn. All right.
Great.
Any other comments? Not, we are adjourned. Thank you all for being here.